So this story starts as I was driving to an old friend's house who lived a couple states away. It was a quiet night and I was driving along an isolated stretch of highway, a road I was unfamiliar with and unusually dark. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, the fog making the already dark setting even more unclear. Dense trees on either side of the road only further adding to the eerie atmosphere. As I rounded a particularly sharp bend, the beam of my headlights caught a figure standing on the roadside. A hitchhiker, shrouded in a tattered coat, thumb lazily outstretched. It was an odd sight, given the hour. Despite better judgment considering the time, I decided to see where the man was headed at this hour. Curiosity overcame caution, and I found myself slowing down, the wheels of my car crunching on the gravel as I pulled over. He approached, a lanky silhouette against the darkness, his face hidden beneath the hood of his coat. "Where you headed?" I asked. "Just up the road," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried in the still night. There was an odd inflection in his tone, a subtle menace that I chose to ignore, attributing it instead to the eerie setting. I figured since he didn't need to go far, it wouldn't be much of a hassle, so I let him in. As we drove, the silence between us grew heavy, suffocating. I attempted small talk, but his responses were short, evasive. The only sound was the gravel beneath the tires and the occasional flutter of wings as a nightbird took flight, startled by our passage. A sense of dread began to gnaw at the edges of my consciousness, a feeling that I had made a grave mistake. My thoughts raced, searching for an excuse to let the man out early. Then suddenly, I felt a cold hand gripping my shoulder, fingers digging in with inhuman strength. "Stop the car," he commanded, his voice no longer a whisper but a shout, laced with a malice that froze my blood. Panic took hold as I realized the situation. After I had stopped the car, he showed me his knife, telling me not to do anything stupid or things would get dirty. My heart was racing. Why did I let this man in my car? I felt like a fool in the moment. After showing me his knife, he told me to keep driving, directing me to an unknown location. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, my mind racing with escape plans. There was a sharp turn up ahead. I could make the turn abruptly in hopes to get away. It was risky, but it might be my only chance. As I neared the turn, I feigned a glance in the rearview mirror, as if calculating my chances. Then, with a sudden jerk, I turned the wheel sharply, the car careening towards the edge of the road. At the last moment, I dove out of the door, rolling into the underbrush as the car, along with the hitchhiker, continued forward, crashing into the barrier. The silence that followed was absolute. I lay there, panting, my heart racing as I tried to comprehend what had just happened. I desperately tried to find my phone to call the police, but I must have left it in the car. I laid there just waiting and waiting, hoping for someone to drive by and help. After a few minutes, I noticed the man slowly get out of the car and run back into the woods. I saw he had sustained some severe injuries from the crash. As dawn approached, I made my way on foot back to civilization. The police found my car, but there was no sign of the hitchhiker. They searched, but the dense underbrush and the treacherous terrain made it impossible. There were questions, of course, suspicions raised by my improbable story. But in the end, there was nothing but the wreckage to attest to the night's events. Thankfully, I didn't get any severe injuries from this, just a few bruises and a totaled car. After some time, I got everything situated and moved on with my life. I never found out who he was, however, or if he even survived the crash after making his way to the woods. I just hope that I never have another encounter like that ever again. With the fading light of a late October evening, my journey through the deserted backroads of the countryside had taken an unexpected turn. The route I'd chosen, supposedly a shortcut, had stretched on, winding through dense forests and over neglected bridges, further from civilization with every passing mile. The radio, my only companion, had long since succumbed to static, leaving me enveloped in an uneasy silence, punctuated only by the occasional howl of the wind outside. I was contemplating whether to turn back or press on in hopes of rejoining the main road when I spotted a figure ahead, standing by the roadside. A hitchhiker, far from anywhere, under the thin veil of moonlight that managed to penetrate the thick canopy overhead. I slowed the car to a stop beside the stranger. He was tall, his features obscured by the hood of his jacket and the darkness. A chill ran down my spine, not from the cold, but from the eerie silence that surrounded us. "Need a lift?" I called out, my voice portraying a hint of nervousness. The hitchhiker nodded, his voice deep and low-pitched. "Yes, thank you," he said. He climbed into the passenger seat, bringing with him a cold draft of air. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, instantly regretting offering him help. But the road was lonely, and it felt wrong to leave someone out in the cold. The drive was quiet, neither one of us saying much. He claimed to be visiting family, yet could not name the town we were nearing, his gaze fixed ahead, as if lost in thought. Unease settled in my stomach like a stone, the car's interior feeling suddenly claustrophobic. The silence stretched on, becoming almost tangible, until he abruptly directed me to turn onto an even more secluded path, a detour that would supposedly lead us back to the main road. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong, yet against my better judgment, I followed his directions, the dense forest swallowing us whole. As we reached a clearing, where he asked me to stop. The moonlight revealed an abandoned cabin, its windows dark, the air thick with an undefinable sense of dread. "We're here," he stated flatly, his tone emotionless. Panic gripped me as I realized the gravity of my situation. I was alone, miles from anyone, with a stranger whose intentions were unclear. I think I should be getting back," I stammered, reaching for the ignition. His hand shot out, gripping my arm with an iron strength that belied his calm demeanor. "No," he said, his voice suddenly menacing. "You're exactly where you need to be." Adrenaline surged through me, a primal instinct to flee taking over. In a desperate move, I managed to wrench my arm free, shoving him away with all my might. He stumbled out of the car, and I didn't hesitate. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, the tires spinning wildly before catching grip, propelling the car forward, away from the cabin, the hitchhiker. The drive back to the main road was a blur, fueled by fear and adrenaline. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, where I reported the incident to the local authorities. They listened, promising to investigate the area I described. It was only later, when I was safely home, that the gravity of what had happened truly hit me. I'd escaped, but the thought of what might have happened if I hadn't managed to flee haunted me. I was left with a deep-seated fear. Ever since I was little, I've had an uncanny ability to sense when things were about to go south. A tingling in the back of my skull, a whisper on the wind. Call it intuition, or a sixth sense. That night, as I stood by the side of the road with my thumb outstretched, that familiar dread crept over me like a shadow at twilight. The day had been long, and luck wasn't on my side. Cars passed in blurs of indifference, leaving me with nothing but the company of a rapidly setting sun. The road stretched through an endless expanse of woods, the kind of place where secrets are kept and stories are born. It was beautiful, in a haunting sort of way, a scene right out of a Stephen King novel. As darkness swallowed the landscape, headlights finally danced in the distance. A car slowed, its windows a mirror to the night. The driver, a middle-aged man with a grin too wide for comfort, offered me a ride. "Where to?" he asked, his voice smooth, like oil on water. I told him the next town over, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. The car was clean, almost obsessively so. It smelled of pine and something else, something metallic. We made small talk, or rather, he did, He asked questions, too many questions, about where I was from, why I was alone. His curiosity wasn't casual, it was invasive, like tendrils snaking into my privacy. My answers were vague, guarded. His smile never wavered. As we drove, the unease grew. The road seemed to stretch on forever, a black ribbon through the dark woods. The man kept glancing at me, his eyes reflecting something I couldn't quite place. Fear, perhaps, or anticipation. That's when I noticed there were no belongings in the car, no signs of a life outside of this moment. It was as if he existed solely on this road, in this night. The conversation died, and a heavy silence fell between us. I considered asking him to stop, to let me out, but we were miles from anywhere, swallowed by the night. Then, without warning, he turned off the main road onto a dirt path barely visible through the trees. Panic rose in my throat. Where are we going? My voice sounded small, lost in the vastness of the dark woods. To see something, he replied, his tone casual, as if we were about to admire a scenic view rather than delve deeper into isolation. The path ended at an old, abandoned house, its windows dark, its structure swallowed by overgrowth. "We're here," he announced, turning off the engine. The silence that followed was suffocating. Every cell in my body screamed to run, but where? The woods were an impenetrable black, and he was between me and the only exit. "Why are we here?" I asked, trying to mask my fear with curiosity. He turned to me, the smile gone, his face a mask of blank intent. "Because no one will hear you scream." It was then I acted, not thinking, just moving. I slammed into him with all the force my body could muster, catching him off guard. He stumbled, and I bolted, not looking back, not even when I heard him shout after me. I ran until my lungs burned, until the house and the man were nothing but a nightmare behind me. I didn't stop until I saw lights, a car on the main road. They stopped, thank God, they stopped. The police found his car, but not him. They told me the house had been abandoned for years, a place of local legends and ghost stories. They never found the man, but sometimes, when the night is too still, I feel his presence, lurking just beyond the shadows. Since then, I've never hitchhiked again. The open road, once a symbol of freedom, now feels like a corridor of unseen threats. I learned that night that monsters are real, and they don't always lurk in the dark corners of the world. Sometimes they come smiling, offering you a ride.